Hello. Hello, welcome here. Thank you for being here. I'm very excited for this video because recently I have been developing a new vision, a new dream for myself, and I'm very excited about it. And that dream is to know my library very intimately and very well. Okay? This past summer, and really my whole life, I've been accumulating books. I've been bringing in quite a few recently, quite a few stacks. And I mean, if I keep going at this rate, it's going to get out of control. It's going to get out of control. It's been good. I've had a lot of good deals and books that I'm very glad and thankful that I have. But I've got to reel it in a little because it's growing fast. And I found myself, there's been moments when I've been in a bookstore thinking, do I have this volume already? Do I have this? And I'm not sure. I don't know. And I want to know. I want to know all the volumes that I have, and I want to read all the volumes that I have. I want to reread all the volumes that I have. Because to really get to know a book, you have to read it more than once. The first time is just the initial meeting. It's just deciding if it's worth reading again. That's all the first read is. And I recently heard on a podcast that someone like Thomas Aquinas and probably many other academics of antiquity, I don't know if he's antiquity, whatever, they didn't have access to the wild amounts of books that we have. Thomas Aquinas maybe had 200 to 300 volumes. That seems wild because his works are so deep and wide. There's so much in them that you think he must have read thousands of books to know all of these things. But he didn't read obscene amounts of books. He just read the books he had very well. And I think that is the real marker of real intelligence and real wisdom and real knowledge, is really knowing your subject, right? Like experts are someone who know their subject, who don't need to look it up, but can just speak from the heart about it. And I want to be able to look at my volumes and know what's in them and know where they fit in their slots of time and history, and get to know their authors and love the ideas. And I'm just so excited about my new vision and my new dream. And one of the things that has ignited this vision, shall we say, is that because of a few different factors, I have reread quite a bit this year. I've reread more this year than I think I have any other year of my life so far. And that's because I have been reading with a book club and because I've been reading alongside the Literary Life podcast. And in both of those situations, they have been reading things that I've already read. So I've been able to go back and reread them and dip in again. And I've learned it's just such a blessing. It's so good. You learn so much. Even when sometimes I don't even remember the basic story. I can't even tell you the plot. I gotta read it. If I can't remember the plot, I for sure have to read it again. You know, that's like basic. I've really enjoyed this. It has reminded me how important it is to reread. And like often, I do love checking things off. You know, I feel, oh yes, I read that big book. I read that book. That one's done. But I don't want to look at my library like a big long checklist. I want to look at it like something living and breathing that I'm interacting with all the time and coming in and out of and in a conversation with. And I've never loved ebooks, and I've never loved using a public library because I've always loved seeing my books in front of me. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. It's over here. And I couldn't always quite put my finger on it, but I think somewhere inside me, I knew this. I knew this a little, you know, that I wanted to know them. And I wanted to read them, and I wanted to read my notes in the margins. Anyway, and so I want to really get into that this year. Really read and reread a lot. But first, I wanted to go over some of the books that I have reread fairly recently and talk about what was different. Was rereading worth it? What I learned. Different kinds of rereading. I'm just going to move into the books. I'm going to go through a couple of them. Okay, this first one. The Luck of Ginger Coffee by Brian Moore. Now, you probably have not heard of this book. The only context I've heard of this book is within the English class that I read it in. And I read it in first year, and I didn't really care about it. I thought, whatever, kind of boring. Okay, maybe there's something there because he put it on the syllabus. Hadn't really thought about it for quite a few years. And then I recently went to Ireland, and I was scanning through my library to find anything remotely Irish that I could read before I went. And this popped up because it's kind of a Canadian-Irish novel author. And on the second read, great. I cried. That's how good it was. I cried. I really liked it. And this whole time I've been looking at it on my shelf as if it wasn't that good. So now when I see it, fondness. Okay, then Harry Potter. This is kind of a different kind of reread because you're going into it excited. I said I knew this was good, and I'm so looking forward to going back and just being with an old friend again. And that is such a special type of rereading. I just recently finished this series. It just made me love it more. If things are good, rereading only makes them better. And that was the case with the Harry Potter series. Incredible. This year, I also reread Jane Eyre. Now, this one, when I reread it, I actually listened to it via audiobook. For the first time around in books, I find it really hard to do audiobook. I just can't pay attention, and I never know what's happening. But if I already know the story fairly well, rereading or re-listening, doing an audiobook for the reread, I find works for me and sort of gives me a fresh perspective on the text. So that's what I did with this one. And I noticed a big difference with this one the second time, that even the characters and it's remembering their names even was easier, which it's really hard to talk about a book when you can't even remember the characters' names. So anyway. And also really enjoyed the story a second time. Incredible. Okay, this book, big boy, is the Bible. Now, this is something I have reread multiple times already in various translations, but I think that's also an interesting thing to do with books that are translated, to read them in different translations. But literature is all Western literature. Like almost every book is like probably influenced by this book in some way. Like you can probably find some connection, some reference, some wording in almost any book in the English language that stems from this. So if you're someone who thinks reading is important or likes reading or just wants to understand books, reading the Bible and knowing it is kind of invaluable. So this one is a permanent reread for me. Another one is Rereading by James Joyce. And this is a short story, and I've talked about it on here quite a bit. But it was a short story that was about 5 pages long. And because of that, I reread it probably 5 or 6 times. So it was really nice to be able to reread something that many times. Because it was so short. And I don't think there aren't many other books that I've read that many times or stories. And I found myself, I was captivated by the story initially, which is why I read it that many times. But you just begin to see patterns, especially in short stories. There's so many details and images, and every word is so intentional. So when I was rereading Araby, you just start to see all these images and patterns and pictures that just didn't pop out the first time, and the story becomes so much richer than it was the first time. So I think if you haven't really reread anything, I would recommend doing a short story, because you can really immediately get the fruits of your labor. Right away, you can see how getting to know the story completely changes the way you think about it and read it and see it. And it's a lot harder to do with a big long novel. So I recommend trying it with a short story. It was good for me. One thing I wanted to talk about was the series Unfortunate Events, because this I have not read in a long time, but this is the last book in the series, and I read the whole series 2 or 3 times when I was in middle school-ish. And I think that like, looking at the way kids read and the things that kids love, they repeat the same thing over and over again. If you love a series as a kid, you reread it and you reread it and you reread it. And I think, why do we stop doing that? And so this was just a reminder that I used to have it right. When I love something, I would reread it 3 times. This is 13 books long. I read the whole thing 3 times. Because I loved it, and that's how I would express my love for it. Good little reminder. And, okay, I'll do these together, because the thing that I loved about these is kind of the same. So we have Reflections on the Psalms by C.S. Lewis and The Odd Woman by George Gissing. And these, I reread them, but when I reread them, I read them with a group of people. And this one I read slowly. We read 1 chapter a week for quite a few months. And this we just read for a book club for a month. And I find that rereading with people is so good, because you start thinking about things you want to bring up, things you want to talk about. You also can hear other people's ideas and perspective and things that they noticed that you didn't notice. And so reading maybe once by yourself and then another time with people, or the other way around, also just opens the book up, because reading is just one big conversation. So bringing in more voices into that only deepens and enriches your reading life. That was a lot and maybe repetitive, I'm not sure, but I got really excited when I was thinking about all these books that I had reread and all of the golden nuggets that it had given me. I would love to know what books you have reread. Have you reread any books, and what was it like? Did you love it more? Did you learn more? Did you hate it? Okay, interesting. There will be much more content about this coming up, because I'm obsessed. Okay, I'll see you later. I'll see you soon. Catch you around.